tonight we're talking about the endangerment of the United Kingdom. The importance of England, Great Britain, United Kingdom to us in our history is known by everyone. And the important role that they've played in world affairs over the past couple of centuries is well known. The United Kingdom isn't quite the powerhouse it was a while ago, but it's still enormously important, and especially to American foreign policy. So the issues that are before us, that are coming out of Brexit, are critical, I think, to our foreign policy. As you all know, the Scots voted something like plus 60% in favor of staying in, and Northern Ireland voted 55% or so to stay in. So you have two of the members of the United Kingdom who have expressed strong preferences for remaining within the European Union. So it's a complicated question which the government is facing today, and we're delighted to have Dan talk about it. Nearly all of you have read something that Dan has written over the years for the Baltimore Sun. He's a graduate of Oberlin College, that wonderful liberal institution in the middle of the Midwest. And Dan's early journalist careers were also in the Midwest, in the state of Ohio. First of all in Cleveland with the Cleveland Press, and then later in Indianapolis with the Indianapolis Times. In both of those assignments, he got professional awards from his colleagues, which I think are impressive. During the time in Indianapolis, he was a Nieman Fellow at Harvard, which is a wonderful thing for a young man where he was at that time. And after a year at the New York Herald Tribune, he came to the Sun, where he was originally an editorial writer for the Evening Sun. And I was reminded that Brad Jacobs, who was chairman of this council for many years, was the editor of the editorial page of the Evening Sun for a long time. But Dan then went to London as chief of the London Bureau, which he, with his tongue-in-cheek, reminded me, for which he had one assistant. But he was the London correspondent for the Baltimore Sun in the heyday of the Sun, which all of you know was one of the nation's very best international newspapers, with foreign correspondents in at least 5 capitals around the world, and with wonderful representation in Washington, D.C., with a diplomatic and a defense correspondent. It was really a remarkable group of people who were then doing international things for the Baltimore Sun. Dan has been, was an editorial writer then on the Sun proper for almost 30 years. And a large number of you have read a lot of his editorial pieces. At the Sun, he was given Professional Colleagues Awards again, at least twice for his opinion page. In any case, it's a impressive career. Well, I've known Dan for a long time, and of the people I know, he's one of the few who has an extraordinary depth of knowledge for whatever opinion he expresses. Most of my friends like bottom line things and exclude the things that come prior to the bottom line. But Dan has always been very, very thorough. I imagine him to be reading the same things he did when he was still with the Sun. I knew of no one who would know this particular topic any better than Dan does. And so I'm absolutely delighted that he's been willing to join us, Mr. Dan Berger.
Well, this is where I'm supposed to say I'm happy to be here. Actually, I feel very strange being on this side and not out there where I belong, where I always am. And that may be the last recommendation I'll ever make. We do take the United Kingdom for granted as solid, reliable, always there, financially, militarily, politically. As I told Dr. Bird, I think we no longer can. Its government and politics have become somewhat dysfunctional. Brexit, the British exit from the European Union, is part of the reason, only part, but it's where this whole thing comes together, intertwined with two regional crises in Scotland and in Northern Ireland. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland gave 2 years' notice on leaving the European Union, and it will be out March 29th next year at midnight European time. That's 11 p.m. British time. No matter what, be out. It's not quite as bad as it sounds because there can be a 21-month transition period after that. And what does that mean? Well, they haven't agreed on what it means, so I can't tell you. Theresa May's Conservative or Tory government has spent most of this past year and a half negotiating with the European Union, negotiating with itself. It has great internal disagreements. And haven't got very far. There was a European Union summit started this evening in Brussels with a dinner of the heads of government. Prime Minister May spent the morning answering questions in the House of Commons and flew to Brussels for dinner. She was instructed by the EU to bring fresh ideas. She made a very pleasant speech, very agreeable, with no fresh ideas. They went through dinner, and they agreed that this deadline was not a deadline, and they'll take a couple of weeks more. And there's some other deadline now. They were going to have a summit to wrap it all up next month. That seems off. Now, virtually every interest group in the United Kingdom is deeply nervous and anxious about the terms of the Brexit. And in an absolute panic about leaving without having come to terms, which now seems highly likely. A no agreement Brexit is being forecast on all sides, and all governments say they're making preparations. Now I'll explain these two other crises. One is Scotland, where people voted overwhelmingly to remain in Europe. They had a referendum 4 years ago on independence, and it failed by 45% to 55% for remaining in the UK, so it was fairly close. The current government of Scotland, which is sort of like an American state with its own government now, will use anything that happens as a reason for arguing for independence, which right now the Scottish people would not favor. The other is Northern Ireland. The peace it's had for 20 years, such as it is in a context of United Kingdom and Ireland jointly being in the European Union since 1970, New Year's Day 1973. If they are separate and start having immigration problems, trade problems, that breaks down. And there would be a border between the two Irelands with inspections, maybe troops, who knows. Nobody wants that, but nobody agrees on how to prevent it. This is just a side issue. It's the issue on which the EU and the UK are completely hung up on. The main issue is whether to have a hard Brexit or a soft Brexit. Hard means it's completely separate. It would negotiate trade with the EU the way the United States does. A soft Brexit means, well, not exactly. It would, for good practical purposes, have free trade and maybe common customs, a customs union. You might not want to call it that. And of course, free movement of capital. It's extremely important to the British, but not free movement of people. What all this is about partly is everybody in the world deciding it doesn't want any more immigration in its country. And whether it's here, whether it's Britain, whether it's in other members, that's a good deal of what's behind this. The other thing behind this is that many in Britain are unhappy with the loss of sovereignty from having to follow EU regulations on products and all sorts of things like that. I think Mrs. May actually had mildly favored remaining in Europe, and then took charge of a government committed to leave. She compromised with the EU easily. On this issue, she has trouble with her own cabinet and enough of her own members of parliament who would combine with Labour to overthrow the government. There's a compromise involving both the Irish issue and maybe the main issue called a stopgap. And what is a stopgap? It means that for practical purposes, they haven't left for a transition period, which could be indefinite. The rest of my talk is going to be an elaboration of the points I've just made. The European Union of 28 democratic countries with 24 official languages includes most of Western Europe, some former Soviet satellites in Central and Eastern Europe, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania that were in the Soviet Union. And it has institutions such as a government might have. It has a parliament, a court of justice, a civil service, and 2 or 3 different people whose titles would indicate they're the head of it, so you can't tell which one really is. The real one, I'll tell you, is the head of the most important country in it, which is Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany, but she's never the one making the statements. you'll find Jean-Claude Juncker of the Commission, head of the Commission, and Donald Tusk, the former Polish Prime Minister, who's head of the European Council, they making the statements. No, but the people who count and are never making the statements are Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron of France, because Germany, France, and United Kingdom are the most important countries in the EU. And they're the major donors. The major takers of aid are in Southern and Eastern Europe, and used to include Ireland and Scotland. The European Union, it began life really as a way to prevent Germany and France from ever going to war again. And Germany and France are the heart of it. And it began life in 1951-2 as the European Economic Community of 6 countries. And since then, it has deepened and broadened and changed names a few times. And deepening means taking on more powers, creating more institutions, becoming more of a superstate. Broadening means taking on more members. There's a contradiction to those two things, but they've plowed on with both, no matter. The European Union has 510 or 15 million people. The United Kingdom has 65 or 6 million of them. Without the United Kingdom, it's smaller, it's lost one of its more powerful and richer nations. It has several members are threatening to go broke, as Greece did. The Union has a single monetary policy, while all the nations have separate fiscal policies. This doesn't always work. A monetary policy that works for Germany may not be good for Italy. There's a movement against immigration and free movement of peoples almost everywhere. And the principle of the common market and common customs union is that it's the free movement of goods, capital, services, and people to do all those things. And without the free movement of people within it, it doesn't really work. And you couldn't give an exception to one important country, because then everyone would want it. The United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, England has 55 or 6 million people. Scotland has 5 and a fraction, 1/10. So its relation to England is about like Canada to the United States. Wales has 3 and a fraction million people. Northern Ireland has under 2 million, about 1.8, something like that. In other words, for all the trouble Northern Ireland has caused itself and the world for 50 years, it has fewer people than metropolitan Baltimore. It's impossible to name all the problems that Brexit would bring, just a few. The Gibraltar issue with Spain, the British base in Cyprus, which is a member, trade, the British car industry, some of which is foreign owned, has started to move out. Finance, virtually every international bank that has a big office in London serving the European Union has rented space somewhere for at least 20 or 40 kernel of further growth people in either Frankfurt or Amsterdam or Dublin or Paris. And if anyone later wants to ask why those four, I can answer. But security and crime would be hurt if the UK were no longer in Europol, though it would remain in Interpol. Those are two different things. Many industries would be messed up. The British construction, hospitality, and financial industries absolutely require European labor. So does the National Health Service. British hospitals have as many foreign doctors as our hospitals do. These are soluble problems, but without agreement, they're crises, instant crises, which would include getting critical medicines to hospitals, maintaining borders for customs and immigration when there are no staff for to do that anymore, managing airline connections that now are domestic. Presumably the 2 million British people living in the European continent and the 3 million Europeans living in Britain would be all right, though who knows, for a while they'd have to make adjustments. Right now, if a Briton needs urgent care or emergency care in a hospital in France, he gets it. And the hospital bills the British National Health Service. The moment Britain's not in the EU, that same Britain had better have travel insurance. Well, the Tory government did certainly not want Brexit. And Prime Minister Cameron, David Cameron then, was putting up with the growth of the Brexit led by a movement led by a startup party called the United Kingdom Independence Party, or UKIP. He said, well, we'll have a referendum. 2016. And he led the charge for Remain in Europe in the referendum. And guess what? It lost. Very close, 51 and a fraction to 48 and a fraction. But suddenly, Britain's committed to leaving. Nobody in Parliament wanted this, really. Now, the referendum has no legal binding in the British Constitution. Only Parliament decides anything. But having had an official referendum, most members of Parliament feel politically and morally obliged to carry it out, though they might not like to. Cameron resigned the next day, and the Conservative Party made Mrs. May Prime Minister. So she was against Brexit and took charge of accomplishing it, hoping to do it in as moderate a way as possible. Her way to do that was to, instead of waiting until 2020 for an election, call a snap election last year to build more support for the British position in negotiating with the EU. But guess what? She lost support. She no longer has a majority government. It's what's called a minority government. Their party is the largest in parliament. It's just short of a majority. And it does not have a coalition partner, but it is kept in power by the 7 votes of the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland. This is a party that grew out of the Reverend Ian Paisley's fundamentalist church. It's adamant about staying in the United Kingdom. It's very Protestant, very British, and all it exists for is to keep that relationship. So, if Mrs. May gave in to what the EU wants for solving the Irish border problem, it would have what they call a border in the Irish Sea, a customs and immigration check somehow between Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. No, she can't agree to that. The Democratic Unionists, led by Arlene Foster, would bring her government down. And there'd have to be a British election, and the agreement with the EU would be invalid. If she agreed with the EU on a long transition, on really sort of staying in the EU without admitting it, and without having any say in the EU rules that govern it. A good deal of her own Conservative Party in her own cabinet, or those 3 who just quit it, would bring the government down, and the same thing. Now, this situation cries out for a strong Labour Party. It's every bit as weak and divided as the Conservative Party. It should win the next election. It's in no shape to win anything. Its leader, Jeremy Corbyn, he came up on the far left fringe of the party. He was on the Argentine side of Britain's war with Argentina over the Falkland Islands. He favored having communists and Trotskyites in the Labour Party. He at times in the past, I'm not talking about the past year, but in the past, had really favored IRA terrorism in Britain and Ireland, and favored Palestinian terrorism in Israel, or maybe elsewhere. The Labour grassroots members who have more scope, more say than the Tory grassroots members do in their party, they made him a member over the opposition of just about all his parliamentary colleagues 3 years ago. His handling since then of accusations of anti-Semitism in the higher ranks of the party has alienated most of organized Judaism in the UK, which I think, last I knew, most Jewish people generally voted Labour, not now. His program that he announced there calls for renationalizing many industries, and maybe some that were never nationalized before. Certainly improving the welfare state, which is really what his electorate wants. Compelling large corporations to set aside shares for worker collective ownership and to have a worker on the board. That would be a big change. Now, every party in this country or others that goes out of power undergoes an internecine struggle over whether now what was wrong was you've got to be true to your principles, or no, you've got to cater to the center vote, which is that's a contradiction. And they often have a struggle, as Labor just did. Labor previously made exactly this choice of a leader in 1980 when it had been out of power for several years. It shows its most prominent left-winger, Michael Foot, who was known with his brother and his nephew as the three left feet of British politics. As leader, the leading centrist defected and formed another party called the Social Democrats, which petered out and joined the Liberal Party, which is now called the Liberal Democrats. Michael Foot led Labor into the 1983 election. After that defection, it was Labor's worst showing since 1918, and it helped produce 23 years of unbroken Tory rule. It took 3 changes of leader, each more moderate than the last, before Tony Blair brought the party back to power in 1997. He modernized Britain's institutions for good or ill in a number of ways, and he accepted a lot of the conservative reforms made by Margaret Thatcher's previous conservative government. He won the next 2 elections. He's the only Labor leader ever to have won 3 successive parliamentary elections. And he has served longer as Prime Minister consecutively than any other Labor leader. Today, the party absolutely despises him. They will all say he was a Tory in lamb's clothing. I would guess that he's what the party needs to win an election, and they wouldn't dream of it. That's out of the question, don't raise it. Now, one thing he did do was to give devolved government. That means something like Northern Ireland has, something like American states in Scotland and Wales, to head off the growing sentiment for independence of Scotland and Wales. He did this without apparently understanding how Quebec works in Canada, where the Parliament is a vehicle for craving independence. But he did this confident that Labour was in charge in Wales and Scotland, as it certainly had been. While Labour has remained in charge in Wales. In Scotland, the small Scottish Nationalist Party grew enormously large for a couple of reasons. First, because of North Sea oil. They thought, well, why should the UK get North Sea oil? It's Scotland's oil. That argument is over because the oil is playing out and the revenue isn't that great. But the next thing was Blair's moderation or conservatism when in power on welfare issues. The Scottish people are more socialist in that respect than the English people are. And so the Scottish Nationalist Party got to the left of the UK Labour Party and stole all its members. And the Labour Party also bungled its first control of the Scottish Parliament. They built a Parliament building with a cost overrun of 800%. So, and Alex Salmond, the head then of the Scottish Labour Party, Scottish Nationalist Party, was everyone considered the ablest politician in the UK. He forced the UK to grant a referendum for independence. It lost 55 to 45. He resigned, and his protege, Nicola Sturgeon, replaced him as the First Minister of Scotland, leader of the Scots Nationalists. She's the ablest politician in the UK now. And she'll manipulate, if she can, the Brexit issue anyway to get Scotland to stay in Europe and leave the UK. Northern Ireland has a very strange government system under its restoration and its peace since 1998. Instead of the second-ranking party leading the opposition, the 5 leading parties were guaranteed a ministry at least each, and the first minister would be the head of the largest Protestant party, Protestants being a majority, and that's now the Democratic Unionist Party, which overthrew the establishment unionists. The deputy first minister would be the head of Sinn Féin, which is the legal face of the Irish Republican Army, which was illegal. The 2 minister and deputy minister would have to act as one. All this sounds impossible. It was designed to bring peace between the Protestant Unionists who want to stay in the United Kingdom and the Irish Catholics who want to unite with the Irish Republic. It sounds impossible. It worked very well. One of the first people who headed it. Until last year, early last year, the Sinn Féin leader at that time, Martin McGuinness, had died and was replaced by Irene O'Neill. Threatened to resign unless there was an inquiry over a previous scandal, financial scandal, which implicated Arlene Foster. This was denied and she resigned. I guess Martin McGuinness resigned and then he died and she became prime minister, deputy first minister. And then she sought up another reason to hold out for, which was to make Irish an official second language as it is in the Republic. Now it's the first language of nobody in Northern Ireland. I know I've read that 0.3% grew up with it as the first language they spoke, but I don't believe it's nearly that high. And the very considerable effort of almost a century to keep it alive in the Irish Republic is really not working very well. However, this was not granted, and she's remained out for about 18 months. There has not been an executive government of the devolved government of Northern Ireland. And I won't say nobody's noticed, but so far it's been all right. And this is a threat for Britain to reimpose what is called direct rule from London by a Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, who is not Northern Irish, if such a position exists. But so far they haven't had to do this. Sinn Féin will use anything that happens, if it can, to produce its goal of union with the Irish Republic. This means one of the key players who is negotiating is, well, one of them is Arlene Foster, she's been to Brussels negotiating with the EU's chief negotiating, Barnier, and getting a very hostile reception. She has no official role now except a member of the Legislative Assembly of Northern Ireland. She has no executive role, but she's a very key player. Another one, besides Iris O'Neill of Sinn Féin, is Mary Lou MacDonald in Dublin of Sinn Féin. She's not in the Irish Republic government, she's in the opposition. She's not in Northern Ireland or the UK at all, but she's negotiating because she is in effect the leader of Irene O'Neill. Now, if all this is confusing, good. It's supposed to be. If it were clear, it would be false. Don't think the people over there understand it any better than we do here. That's my introduction, but I have two more points to make, extraneous. One of them is, in this Year of the Woman, you hear the argument that the trouble with everything is there aren't enough women in government leadership. Women get along better than men, they compromise better, they don't blow up, they don't fight as much. Just about every quarreling leader I've mentioned is female. The German Chancellor, the UK Prime Minister, the Scottish First Minister, the leader of the Conservative Party in Scotland, who is now the leader of the opposition there, replacing Labour, the leader of Sinn Féin, the former First Minister of Northern Ireland, the former Deputy First Minister of Northern Ireland, and the leader of Sinn Féin in the Irish Republic. And for that matter, until the recent party conference, the leader of the Welsh Nationalists were all women. So I'm not suggesting this is the problem. I wouldn't dare. I'm merely suggesting that in this instance, it does not appear to be the solution. The second extraneous point I have to make is that as bad as I think British dysfunction is for what we used to call the Western world, it's not the worst problem. There's a larger, more powerful country that has reneged on its obligations, renounced treaties its partners are keeping, picked fights with its allies, and supported and helped its enemies. Just today, that big power announced that it was leaving the International Postal Union, which it has belonged to for 144 years. Now, fortunately, that's not my topic tonight. Now, I'll be open for questions, comments, and rebuttals. Thank you very much.
Dan had suggested that there are knowledgeable people who might be inclined to offer wisdom beyond just a simple question. Now, we know from prior experience there are people who do that when they don't have to and aren't prepared to. But this evening, we're going on the assumption that only those who are very nicely informed can come up to the mic and make a comment on any facet of the question that's before us this evening. So now the floor is open for both questions and commentaries. Sir, I guess I'll repeat the question. The Irish have given Apple a good deal for a long time, for which Apple then keeps enormous resources within the Irish Republic. The question is, since that's going on, why are they so eager to stay, Ireland, in the EU?
Brexit would be a catastrophe for Ireland. I know I can't say anything about the Apple problem. You know more about it than I do. Ireland has a secret it has never wanted to admit, which is that it's always wanted to be closer to the UK, but not admit it since it fought for independence from the UK. But until 1970s, Ireland's greatest export was its people, and the first place they always went to was England, and it wants to be able to keep that up. The EU has brought a lot of international business to Ireland, all aimed at the continental market. American, Japanese, and Korean, and Taiwanese firms speak English, not French or German. And so they like having assembly lines in Ireland. But older Irish industry of all kinds, but particularly agriculture, is all based on the British market. A customs union, a customs border between Ireland and the UK would be disastrous for Ireland. So far, Ireland, well, as I say, it never wants to admit what I just said, and it right now it's eager to remain in the European Union. It says if Brexit becomes a reality, it will certainly hope Britain makes arrangements for it. We'll see. It's one of the problems this program is about.
Dan, I've read chapters 49 and 50 of the EU Constitution. 49 tells you how to get in, 50 tells you how to get out. But there's nothing in there that says that if you're out, you can come back in. Could you comment?
You said it all. If the British, by act of Parliament, could overturn Brexit and they'd still be in, I think, because the exit hasn't taken effect. But if a referendum happens and rejects it, it's likely to be after the exit, and there's no answer. They'd have to negotiate. The British would want to say, forget it, and the EU would want to say, no, you have to negotiate entrance anew, and that would be about the currency, because Britain is not in the euro, but the EU requires every new member to scrap its currency and adopt the euro. And that would be very difficult for British pride and for British finance.
Thank you.
If Great Britain left, there'd be adverse repercussions for the EU nations, especially France. Given that, is there much of a chance of them taking a softer negotiating position relative to the hard one they've taken to this point?
You said it all. And like any negotiators, they're not saying what their fallback is. They want to know what Britain's fallback is, but they're not saying what their own is. I can say Mrs. May certainly hopes that the French milder line would prevail. Don't know. She doesn't know any more than you or I do.
Why does the United States care at all about Brexit? Now, if you say it doesn't, Dan, I'll be very disappointed.
I'm gonna make it trickier than that. The United States cheered British membership on. We trust Britain, much more sensible than those Continentals. Get on with them better. But anything that strengthened and unified the West in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we were for, and previous American administrations were for. Now, our current president spoke in favor of Brexit. He, I can't exactly say why. He owns golf courses in Scotland where he's been quarreling with the government, and in Ireland where I think he's been quarreling with the government. I can't really tell you what our government's policy about this would be now, or what its policy would be on anything else.
The question returns to what I think you wanted to do earlier, and that is share with us the reasons for the various cities being considered as possible holders of the central economic concerns or financial concerns of the EU, and which one's likely to win.
The big banks are making different decisions. They're going to different ones of these four. Okay, Frankfurt, because it's the home of the German central bank and the European central bank, and is a financial capital. Amsterdam, because it's something of a financial capital where everybody's second language is English, and an English-speaking person can talk to a cab driver all right. Dublin, because it's a European capital that's English-speaking. Paris, because rich people like bankers would rather live there than any of those other places I mentioned. And they're all getting some of these rentals.
2 questions ago, Dan, you mentioned the president's national interest in golf courses in Scotland and Ireland. But of course, favoring Brexit, he does usually by emphasizing immigration. And during your presentation, you mentioned several times the immigration theme running through the countries of the world. And it's so obvious. Hungary is one kind of blatant example, of course, and Germany with its minority parties becoming important. How would you comment further on the immigration issue, which is one, as you said, of the major reasons for Brexit? Concern with the transfer of people and the changing of the population, national way of life, and the rest. So that seems to be a major concern of most of the European countries, certainly of Great Britain, and of the United States, especially as articulated by President Trump. Is there going to be much movement, do you think, within the EU on the immigration transfer of people issue?
That would be a blind guess on my part. I don't think I can do that.
I always call for terse questions and terse answers, and we've just out-tersed ourselves here. Yes, ma'am. Would you comment on whether you think the Russians, in fact, have managed to influence the Brexit vote in any way?
Well, the British are getting interested in that question. There's some discussion about it. There's nothing known as clearly as we know it regarding the United States and some continental countries. There are two aspects. One is, in the Brexit, referendum, a British industrialist, whose name I forget, not all that big an industrialist, put a lot of money by British standards in the election behind the Leave campaign, behind UKIP in the Leave campaign. This is an industrialist who does business in Russia with oligarchs. The suspicion has grown that really he and the oligarchs were funnels for Russian government money, Putin's money, supporting the Brexit campaign. The British Electoral Commission asked for a police investigation of these rumors. The police have just responded a day or so ago that most of what the Electoral Commission wanted the police to investigate, the police will not investigate, because these things, if true, would not be crimes under current UK law, and the police don't investigate things that are not crimes. That leaves just a little aspect of investigation remaining, and I don't know what it concerns. There's a second, on the Scottish question. Alex Salmond, when he was First Minister of Scotland, and everyone said the smartest and ablest politician in the UK, was given a weekly program by RT Britain, the Russian government mouthpiece, television, for a program of comment, which of course was all Scottish nationalist comment. He's still doing it. Some people have said, hey, wait a minute. It took a long time for anyone to say, hey, wait a minute. When he first did this, people just said, well, good for him. You know, he can make a few quid this way. Now they're saying, hey, well, maybe this isn't right. We wonder. He, I think, has resigned from the Scottish National Party till he's also being investigated for 2 allegations of sexual harassment when he was First Minister. He's, I think, resigned from the party and saying he'll rejoin it when everything's been investigated and he's been cleared of all wrongdoing.
The time is up for the session. A number of you still have questions, and we've only begun to touch Dan's knowledge. So we're going to have to call this to a close. Dan, thanks so very much.
Thank you very much.